I've never believed in coincidences at a crime scene. In my experience, everything has an explanation, even the details that seem most absurd. And it was exactly one of those details that almost went unnoticed in one of the strangest investigations of my career. It was a rainy morning when I was called to analyze a suspected homicide in a house far from the city. The victim, a renowned lawyer, was found dead in his home office. The door was locked from the inside, no broken windows, no signs of struggle. At first glance, it looked like a heart attack or maybe suicide. But something was out of place. While the collection team analyzed fingerprints and DNA traces, I did what I always do: observe, meticulously. That's when I noticed the victim's wristwatch lie on the floor near the fallen chair. The dial gleamed under the yellow light of the desk lamp, and the second hand was ticking backwards. At first, I thought it was a defect, maybe an old, broken watch, but something deeply bothered me. The watch was intact, without any signs of a fall or damage. Plus, it was an expensive, nearly new model. The question hammered in my head: why would a perfectly functioning watch be running backward? That's when it hit me. It wasn't a defect. It was a message. Someone wanted us to believe in a false timeline. With that in mind, I started cross-checking all recorded times. When the maid said she heard the last noise, when the neighbors reported strange movement, and when the police were called, the numbers didn't add up. The victim appeared to have died about 2 hours earlier than everyone thought. And if I hadn't noticed the watch, this mistake would have gone unnoticed. I dug deeper. A security camera recording showed a car leaving the house at a time when the lawyer was supposedly already dead. But if the death occurred earlier, who was driving? Inside the abandoned car found a few blocks away, we found a missing clue: a used disposable glove, and more importantly, fibers from the victim's suit on the steering wheel. The killer had dressed the dead man, placed in the car, and driven off to stage a false scene, then returned and inverted the watch to scramble our timeline. But there was something even more sinister. The killer was someone close to the victim, someone who knew his obsessive habits, like never removing his wristwatch. This pointed to absolute premeditation. We pulled the call history. The last contact was with his business partner, a man who, conveniently, had a lot to lose with the victim's decision to expose illicit practices at their firm. When questioned, the partner was too calm, too confident, until we confronted him with the watch detail. He turned pale instantly. Forensics confirmed it. His fingerprints were on the watch's strap, and there was no plausible excuse for that. Sometimes, the smallest clues are the ones that scream the loudest. In court, the prosecutor used the story of the backwards watch as a key piece of evidence. And I was satisfied to know that, once again, attention to even the tiniest detail made all the difference between truth and deception. And that's how a backwards ticking watch unraveled a meticulously planned lie. I've seen many things in my career as a forensic expert, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for that morning. We received a call around 7:45 a.m. A man had been found dead in his own apartment. And the detail that ignited everyone's curiosity was this: his phone had placed a call to emergency services nearly 30 minutes after his estimated time of death. I arrived at the scene as usual, carrying my equipment case and a focused mind. The first thing I noticed was how meticulously arranged everything was. Nothing seemed out of place, except for Daniel Harper's body, lying face down in the living room, frozen in an expression of panic. There were clear signs of cardiac arrest or asphyxiation, but no visible violence. What caught my attention the most was his cell phone, lying on the floor, inches from his open hand, with the emergency call still displayed on the screen. The disturbing detail: the call was logged exactly at 6:32 a.m. And according to the preliminary report from the medical examiner, Harper had died between 6 o'clock and 6:05. I began mentally reconstructing the events. If he had been dead before 6:10, how could the phone have made a call 20 minutes later? The place seemed untouched. No signs of forced entry, no struggle marks. The window was locked from the inside, and so was the door. No third parties visible. It was as if time had been inside that room. We questioned the neighbors. No screams, no strange noises, just a soft instrumental music that some recalled hearing before the police arrived. Analyzing the phone revealed even more mysteries. No fingerprints, no manual screen commands. It was as if the call had been made on its own. Some colleagues speculated about technical glitches or software bugs. I, however, knew there had to be something more concrete. I requested a deep analysis of the device. Meanwhile, I rechecked every corner of the apartment. That's when I noticed a small device on the bookshelf, a smart home assistant linked to the phone. A light bulb went off in my mind. Could someone have used voice commands to initiate the call? When the digital forensic team finished their scan, they confirmed it. The virtual assistant had been activated at 6:31 a.m. by a heavily distorted voice. A quick command, call the police. But that only raised more questions. If the victim was dead, who gave the command? We dug deeper into the assistant's data. And there it was. Just before command, a high-pitched static-like sound had been recorded, followed by a faint voice. The device, confused, interpreted it as a human voice. Reviewing the recordings, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. A muffled sound, almost imperceptible, like something heavy being dragged, followed by labored breathing, and finally the command, in a voice that sounded like Daniel's but much weaker, as if coming from far away. The most plausible and sinister hypothesis was that, in his last moments, perhaps struggling against death, Daniel tried to call for help using the smart assistant. He couldn't reach the phone, but used whatever he had at hand. The device's response delay, combined with possible system glitch, explained the call's late timing. Daniel died trying to get help, and the echo of his final effort came too late. I closed my report that night with a bitter feeling. No matter how much technology advances, nothing replaces the speed of human life. A delay of minutes or even seconds can mean the difference between life and death. That story has never left my mind, because that day, I realized that sometimes the victim still tries to scream, even after death. In all my years as a forensic investigator, few things caught me off guard like that morning at the Monroe estate. I had seen all kinds of forced entries, broken locks, shattered glass, safes battered with crowbars, but never something so clean, so deliberate. The call came in just after dawn. A high-profile art dealer, Vincent Monroe, reported a robbery. Priceless documents and rare jewels were missing from his personal safe. When I arrived, the scene was eerily untouched. No signs of break-in, no forced doors, no alarms triggered. Yet the safe, supposedly unbreachable, stood wide open. I remember stepping into Monroe's private office. Heavy oak furniture, an imposing desk, walls lined with abstract paintings. Everything in its place, except for the gaping mouth of the open safe tucked behind a false panel. I leaned in, careful not to disturb potential prints. No scratches, no dents, no tampering. It was as if the thief had been handed the key. Monroe, a wiry man with restless eyes, swore up and down that only he and his personal assistant, Laura, knew the combination. But Laura had an alibi. She was caught on multiple security cameras at a charity event across town during the time of the theft. Monroe himself had been home, asleep upstairs. Or so he claimed. My instincts buzzed. I started examining the room, inch by inch. A single thread caught my eye. Literally, near the bottom of the desk, almost invisible, was a thin fiber dangling by the safe's edge. It wasn't from any carpet or furniture. It was synthetic, elastic. I pocketed it carefully. Every detail matters when the obvious is missing. The surveillance system added to the mystery. Reviewing the security footage revealed nothing. No suspicious movement. No blacked out frames. The cameras showed an empty hallway leading to the office the entire night. I couldn't help but think. Either someone had tampered with the feed without leaving a trace, or the person was already inside. Pushing harder, I dug into Monroe's background. His finances were a mess. Heavy debts, lawsuits piling up, insurance on the missing items, astronomical. Enough motive for anyone desperate enough to stage a crime. But that didn't explain how the safe had been opened without force. When the lab results came back, that tiny fiber became our golden thread. It belonged to a highly specialized type of gloves, ones used in professional heists to bypass fingerprint and heat detection systems. Only a handful of them existed in the country, sold to very specific buyers. One of them, a private security firm Monroe had recently hired to review his estate's vulnerabilities. Things were starting to fit together. I set a trap. We invited Monroe, and under the pretext of reviewing additional security footage we had recovered, we showed him doctor clips suggesting we had spotted a shadowy figure exiting his office that night. His reaction wasn't shock. It was calculation. A bead of sweat formed on his temple. His hands trembled slightly. People can fake words, but they can't fake adrenaline. It didn't take long before the pieces crumbled. Under mounting pressure and evidence, Monroe confessed. He had orchestrated the entire event. He had hired a former employee of the security firm, a man with intimate knowledge of alarm systems and safe mechanics, to perform a clean robbery to collect insurance money. The gloves were a critical part of the plan. The thief had warned them to avoid leaving any trace. The safe was opened using a bypass technique known only to insiders, not through brute force, but through a flaw in the model's electronic lock system, a flaw Monroe learned about during a security review. It was a flawless crime, until the smallest fiber, hanging by a thread, unraveled the entire operation. Walking out of Monroe Estate that day, the weight of the morning's revelations settled over me. It wasn't always the blood, the chaos, or the broken doors that told the story. Sometimes it was the absence of violence that screamed the loudest. And in the silence of that untouched room, the truth had been hiding all along, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. The call came in early that morning, just as the first rays of sunlight were brushing the tops of the city's tallest buildings. A wealthy entrepreneur had been found dead inside his lavish penthouse. No signs of forced entry, no immediate evidence of foul play. On the surface, it looked like natural causes, maybe even an accident. But my gut, trained by 18 years in the field, told me something was off. When I arrived, the air inside the penthouse was heavy, stale, as if it hadn't been breathed by anyone in days. The body was lying near a leather armchair in the study, perfectly positioned, almost staged. His face was calm, no signs of struggle. A glass of scotch still rested on the small end table next to him, undisturbed. The officers had already begun their preliminary sweep. No sign of a break-in, they repeated like a chorus. Nothing stolen. Still, I asked him to step back. Sometimes, the smallest detail can be the loudest scream. I moved slowly around the room, my eyes scanning every inch. That's when I noticed it. A thin layer of dust coating the mahogany shelves, the glass-topped tables, the ornamental frames. Everything had a uniform, undisturbed film, except for one thing, a small brass statue of a horse, perched on a side table across the room. It wasn't the absence of dust that caught my eye. It was a irregular, circular smudge around the base of the statue, a mark left when someone, recently and carefully, had picked it up and put it back, just slightly out of alignment with the dust around it. Whoever had touched it hadn't realized how obvious that move would be to someone trained to notice. I pulled on a pair of gloves and lifted the statue. It was heavier than it looked. As I tilted it, a faint clicking noise reached my ears. Hidden inside the base was a compartment, and inside it, a flash drive. Bingo! Immediately, the tone of the investigation shifted. The flash drive, once analyzed, contained sensitive documents, evidence of blackmail, fraud, and corporate sabotage. Our victim had enemies, plenty of them, but the most interesting part wasn't the drive itself. It was the fingerprints. The killer had wiped the horse clean, but forgotten to clean the inside compartment. Clear as day, we found a partial print, just enough to narrow down a suspect. The suspect was someone close, someone who knew exactly where the documents were hidden, someone who had access to the penthouse without forcing an entry. It turned out to be his trusted personal assistant, a woman who had worked by his side for almost a decade. She had everything to gain: money, silence, an erasure of years of blackmail. When confronted, she cracked. She hadn't meant for him to die. She had slipped a small dose of poison into his drink, enough to cause what looked like a natural heart attack. But when she noticed a flash drive missing from its usual spot, she panicked. She searched for it frantically, leaving behind that tiny, damning clue in the dust. In the end, it wasn't the advanced forensics, the lab work, or the interrogations that cracked case. It was a careless smudge in the dust, an oversight born from fear and haste. I've always said it. Crimes aren't just solved with science. They're solved with patience, with eyes sharp enough to see what others overlook. And sometimes it's the things we think are dead and forgotten, like dust, that shout the truth the loudest. I remember it vividly because even after years of working with crime scenes, very few cases made my pulse quicken the way this one did. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when I got the call. A businessman named Richard Vance had been found dead in his downtown apartment, an apparent suicide. Gunshot to the head, pistol in his right hand. No signs of struggle. Open and shut case. Or at least, that's what everyone wanted to believe. When I arrived at the scene, something felt staged. The gun was too clean. The blood spatter pattern was strangely linear, as if someone had calculated it. And Richard's expression, frozen in a look of startled confusion, didn't match what you'd expect from someone taking his own life. But no forced entry, no defensive wounds, no signs of anyone else there. The neighbors hadn't heard a thing. Only one person came forward, a young woman named Lila Denton. She lived 2 floors above Richard and claimed to have known him casually. She seemed nervous but cooperative. During her statement, though, Lila said something that made my skin crawl. "I heard the shot around 9:15 p.m., she said, right after the TV turned off." I froze. No one, not even the police who found the body, knew the TV had been on. The door was closed, curtains drawn, and the remote was still across the room on a coffee table. How did she know the TV had been turned off? At first, I thought maybe she had seen the flicker of the screen to the windows, but the layout made that impossible. Richard's TV was in an inner corner of his living room, not visible from any window. There was no way she could have known, unless she had been inside. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I started combing through everything connected to Richard, his business dealing, his emails, his phone logs. That's when another strange thing came up. He had been receiving anonymous threats, demands to back out of a major corporate merger or face personal consequences. Funny thing was, none of these threats had been reported to the police. Richard had only confided in one person about them, his lawyer, and Lila's name never once mentioned. I decided to dig deeper into Lila. Her records were clean, too clean, almost surgically polished. No minor offenses, no financial records that made sense. Her listed job was at a local design agency, but when I called them, they'd never heard of her. She had built a life that looked real on paper, but when you touched it, it crumbled. The psychological tension kept mounting. Every fiber of my instinct screamed that she knew more than she said. During the second interview, I casually mentioned that Richard had left a voicemail before he died. I lied. No voicemail existed, but I needed to see her reaction. She paled. Her eyes darted toward the exit for a split second, a micro movement, but enough for me to catch it. Then she smiled nervously and said, "That's strange. He never liked using his phone." Another detail she should not have known. I now had enough to push harder. With the help of the tech team, we retrieved security footage from the building's elevator. Lila had indeed taken the elevator down from Richard's floor at 9:20 p.m., minutes after supposed suicide. But her explanation? She said she had gone for a walk to clear her head. A coincidence she could no longer afford. When confronted with the evidence, Lila broke down. It turned out Richard had hired a private investigator to dig into the company he was merging with. That investigator uncovered shady deals involving Lila's Real employer, a shell company designed to manipulate the merger for financial gain. She had been sent in to get close to Richard and ensure he either cooperated or stayed quiet. When he refused, the plan changed. The suicide was staged. Lila had access to the apartment. Richard had trusted her enough to give her a spare key. She'd entered while he was distracted, turned off the TV to mask her approach, and shot him with his own gun, wearing gloves to avoid prints. Then she carefully set the scene to look like self-inflicted death. But she couldn't help slipping. No killer ever fully erases a human urge to talk, to correct, to show off their intelligence, even subtly. Her mistake was mentioning something that no outsider could have known. In the end, justice prevailed, but not without a deep lesson that still echoes in my mind. The most dangerous thing at a crime scene isn't always the weapon or the blood. Sometimes it's the words, the ones you were never supposed to hear.